right, welcome to another episode of Plug and Pay. This is a talk show where I sit down with payroll professionals from all around the world to talk about interesting, thought-provoking topics that are shaping the global payroll space. My name is Mark Oliver Fiedler. I'm the CEO and founder of Payzar, and I'm the host of this show. We release new episodes every couple of weeks, and you can find them on our YouTube channel, on our LinkedIn page, as well as any of the major podcast sites, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts. For today's episode, I'm very excited to welcome to the show John Lestock. John is a global payroll accountant at Boeing, and he's been very actively involved in a number of associations, the APA, the American Payroll Association, and the ISCEBS, which he will tell us what that actually stands for. I know it's a mouthful. So John, welcome to the show. Great to have you on. To get us started, maybe if you can just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and your career to date in the payroll space.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on today. Gosh, a little bit about myself. I'm originally from Chicago, and I had lived in Houston, Texas for a while before I moved here to Seattle. And during that time, I've worked in different roles within an accounting or finance function. Along the way, I stumbled into specializing in, of all things, employee benefits, specifically retirement plans. Here in the U.S., they would have what they call a 401k plan, which is essentially a specialized defined contribution plan where the employee and the employer put money into it. Also, your traditional pensions, we need to work with actuaries with someone who retires after so many years of service, and they receive a monthly benefit for their life. Used to work on those as well. And in addition to working on those plans, I also, as a career progressed, veered off and got involved with payroll, primarily U.S. payroll, domestic payroll. And of course, between three cities, between especially Houston and Seattle, where my payroll and benefits career both took off at the same time, always keeping an eye towards the accounting piece, whether I'm actually working in corporate accounting, doing the journal entries and working with the other accountants on the financial statements, or I'm working in an operations function that, although we're indirectly involved with accounting, you still need to have that background, that understanding. So I guess I jokingly say I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. So I've been doing different things. So eventually, I started at Boeing about 4 years ago, the Boeing company, and of all things, global payroll. And at the time I interviewed, I said, well, I don't really have much experience in global payroll. The closest equivalent would have been when I worked on Canadian payroll, when I was at Starbucks Coffee Company, or even companies prior, where I just had a little bit of a taste of Canadian payroll. So, to me, it's foreign, it's global because it's non-US. And they thought, hey, no problem, don't worry, we'll get you set up. Oh boy, I was introduced into a whole different world. Just absolutely crazy. And currently I work on payroll. We outsource our payroll to a third-party provider, but we still are responsible for providing the data to that third party and then reviewing the output we get back from them. We use I guess they call it an aggregator model. So they're responsible for administering, processing payroll in, I lost count, 60 countries, 80 countries. I lose count. 20,000 employees, a lot. And it's funny, that's not counting the subsidiaries that have their own payroll. But so roughly, let's say 60 countries, let's say maybe 20,000 employees, non-US, if you don't count Canada, Russia, or Australia, because they were subsidiaries. And we're sort of thrown into it. And each of us, payroll analysts, payroll accountants, were assigned particular countries that we're responsible for. And for myself, I oversee payroll for Israel, Ireland, Japan, Poland, forgetting one, Belgium. How can I forget Belgium? I can't forget.
I was going to say they went by the alphabet with the I's and the J's, but then
they threw me for a loop. I just recently inherited Turkey. I used to work on Hong Kong payroll, Taiwan payroll, and a long time ago when I first started, a little bit of Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan. We have like one employee in each country. And it's interesting, you think, oh, one employee, how hard could that be? it's never difficult until something unusual happens, say a termination or a new hire. Then all of a sudden, those little details that you needed to know with hiring or bringing an employee on, or what you need to do when the employee terminates, well, if you don't have those details, you need to go out and get those because presto, you have it right now. So it's been quite a learning experience. And I could say after 4 years, honestly, I don't feel like I'm an absolute expert in all of these. I would say I'm knowledgeable enough that I know what I know. I know what I do not know, and I need to continue to learn and continue to develop, because with global payroll, it's impossible to be the absolute expert on every single country. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So for folks who are looking to transition to this as a career, first thing I would tell people is you need to be comfortable with not knowing everything, especially if you've worked in domestic payroll for such a long time. For example, in my case, US payroll. I had worked in US payroll since the early 2000s. And, you get your work experience, you take classes, maybe you seek out a certification through a professional organization such as the American Payroll Association. In the UK, I think that CIPP is their organization. In Canada,
Right. Yeah.
they changed their name to the National Payroll Institute. But again, and then I think in the Netherlands, I'm going to say NIRPA, I believe. And South Africa has their organization, and Australia, of course, TAPS.
Yeah, there's a few countries that have their
There's
own.
a few, but the idea is for your home payroll, your domestic payroll, the career development is you learn it on the job, you're in that role, and then you seek out whether it's formal courses, and then the formal training to complement your experience. Then the next step will be professional certification. You meet the experience requirements, you sit down and take the exams, and then if you pass them, whether it's one or a series, you earn a designation, a certification of some type to demonstrate your proficiency in that particular domestic payroll. Well, if you do that for a long time, you develop this expertise because you know the fine details of that one particular payroll. So how does that relate to global payroll? You're going to be introduced to countries you've never dealt with before, don't speak the language, and you will not have that depth of knowledge you have with your own domestic payroll. And that's something you just need to be comfortable with. And that was difficult for me because it's like I knew US payroll so well.
Yeah, I'm curious about that whole transition, in your career. So as you explained, you originally started off working, kind of coming at it from the accounting and benefits side, and then ended up in payroll, but with, as you explained, originally more domestic scope, and then, with your current role at Boeing, which is obviously a very global company, you ended up, covering lots of different countries. Did you seek that out, or maybe ask differently, what motivated you to make that transition from the domestic payroll environment into the global payroll environment?
I sought it out, and the opportunity was available, both. So a little bit of some active seeking on my part, and just some good luck.
Yeah.
And what motivated me in the first place is my involvement with the American Payroll Association, because they, I'm going to say about 7 years ago, they started a kind of a sister organization that covered global payroll. So when I attended the annual conferences, the annual Congress, I was exposed to different vendors who work in the global payroll space, exposed to sessions or courses that taught kind of the basics of payroll in the Netherlands or payroll in the UK or Australia. So I was just morbidly curious. I wanted to learn more about those. Like, hey, that's something different. And the more I learned, not just the individual countries, but also the delivery models. How do you administer global payroll? And just trying to understand that concept versus how we would do it domestically. You start to get more involved with kind of the bigger picture, the grand scheme. And I just thought that was fascinating. Like, I really want to get involved in this. It's everybody nerds out on something. We all have that one little task, that one little thing that you want to figure out how it works. You want to learn more. It's just something you're interested in. It's the reason why many of us choose the professions we choose, do the jobs that we do. We can jokingly say we fell into payroll. Sometimes some of us sought it out. And in this case, I sought it out. And I was lucky enough
Well,
that
it's
the
nice to
position was
hear.
available at Boeing, and I applied for it. And
Yeah, no, it's a great, a great, match then in terms of what you wanted to do and the opportunity that arose. And you already started talking a bit about, some of what makes global payroll unique and different from the domestic payroll context. Obviously, each local payroll has its own rules and laws that it follows. But without getting into the country specifics, maybe at sort of the meta level, at bigger context, what are the biggest differences that you've experienced between working in a domestic payroll role versus working in a global payroll role?
I think the first thing that really struck me, it's I had to learn to unlearn what I knew in U.S. payroll when I looked at other
Mhm.
countries. Um, what I would find myself doing, and I'll use Canada as an example, because Canada and the US have a lot of similarities. So it's easier to pick it up. It's easier to learn. Oh, yeah, you do this, we do this. But the problem is you focus so much on what's so similar to think, oh, yeah, they're so similar. I can handle this. It's easy to overlook what makes Canada and the US different. But when
Mhm.
you look at the US versus other countries, if you're not aware of what questions to ask or what areas of payroll administration to look into, you're going to miss something big. And the great example would be terminations, that they're far more complicated or far more regulated in other countries versus in the US, whether it's specific termination pay or specific statuses.
Yeah.
Another example would be different types of leaves that in the US, they just really don't regulate certain types of leaves. They do to some extent, but not nearly to the extent that would happen in, say, European countries or Asian countries. So, right away, unless I had that familiarity with a non US country to know what questions to ask, I'll completely miss a whole significant portion of payroll administration. And it just took kind of just experience my own job when I learned in particular countries, look for those similarities, but also kind of think in terms of big picture, what should I be focusing on? Yes,
Yeah.
we could talk about minimum wage because the US has that. Is that a significant issue in other countries? Overtime or different rates? Taxes, you know, some countries it's not as complicated as it is here. Not to say that it isn't complicated, but if you focus too much on one aspect, it's easy to not give the appropriate attention to all those other aspects. And that's what I had to learn. Say, well, don't get stuck on A, focus on B, C, and D, no matter what
Mhm.
country you work on, because you're going to encounter some of these issues.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting insight. That you don't think that everything is going to be, or don't focus on the similarities as you said, right? I think that's a quite you know astute observation that you might assume that things should be quite similar, or on the surface they might seem quite similar, but then as you kind of dig deeper, you start to realize that there's important nuances to pay attention to.
Exactly. And especially if you're trying to standardize across countries, it's fine to look at those aspects that are of compensation that are similar. Everyone has a salary. There's going to be some sort of a overtime or extra,
Hmm.
rate pay of some type, maybe. So there can be those similarities country by country to help standardize, especially if you're going to configure this in a system of some type.
Yeah.
But we, it's like you want to have, if you had two categories, those that are the same and those that are unique to each country, you still want to give special attention to those items that are unique to each country so that they're not overlooked. And whether you're administering payroll, whether you're configuring a system, whether you're trying to develop a pay practice that's consistent across the world, it has to have some flexibility in there. And how do you standardize or operationalize that flexibility so that you're not forcing standardization to the point where you're going to overlook something that is, legislatively required, or even if it's not legislatively required by custom, we need to provide this unique type of payment, whether it's a 13th month pay or an extra vacation payout bonus, that if it's not legislative, everyone in that country expects it. If you intend to attract and retain talent, you should have this feature of your compensation plan. Don't gloss over that as you try to standardize across the world. It's fine to standardize, but definitely have that flexibility for those unique little pieces.
So when you talked about your current role at Boeing, you mentioned that you have a kind of a group of countries that you're at the moment looking after, and they're obviously quite diversified. Pretty colorful mix of different countries that you're covering. Is it fair to assume that your understanding of the U.S. domestic payroll, given that you live in the U.S., you've worked for most of your career in the U.S., you attend trainings and so on, your understanding of U.S. payroll is still at a deeper level than these other countries? Or maybe asked differently, to what level do you need to understand the payrolls in these, for you non-domestic payrolls, that you can actually support them appropriately? Do you need to understand them at the same depth and level that you're understanding your own domestic payroll?
Generally, no. You could, for domestic payroll, you definitely would, especially if you're working in that role yourself, you want to have as extensive experience and knowledge as possible, especially if you're doing the payroll in-house. You're your own local service provider, your own MSP.
Right.
Well, we use that reference. As far as overseeing other countries, it depends on your model. If you're doing all the payroll in-house, of course, you're going to want to have extensive knowledge of UK payroll, extensive knowledge of Belgium or France payroll. If you're outsourcing, it depends on your outsourcing arrangement. Are you depending on that third party to be the expert and you can go to them with questions? Or do you need to have some basic foundational knowledge so that you can ask the right questions, you can properly oversee when you receive output, and provide guidance in a situation where they're only going to do what you tell them to do. So I need to be knowledgeable about payroll in that country enough that I can provide guidance for, please process, include vacation in this manner, please include this allowance. And yes, we've talked to our specialists for the tax treatment, treated in this manner. So you don't need to have a huge in-depth knowledge, but at least some foundational knowledge. If you can get a hold of some training courses, do some research, as much as possible. Try to, in our group, we try to maintain kind of what they call pay specs, kind of the gory details, notes for each country. So you at least have a starting point. The learning is nonstop, but you want to have a good foundation to get started. And don't think that it stops there. As you continue to work on these countries, you will continually learn and pick up new things, and those nuances will start to become more familiar to you. But again, do I need to have that serious in-depth knowledge that I have with US payroll? Not necessarily. Because if I did, that almost feels like, are we trying to bring it back in-house?
No, I understand. And probably, if you're not really, for example, from a language perspective, fluent in, Japanese or, Israel Hebrew, it's probably hard to keep up with, changes in local legislation and, things that can become also quite technical in nature, right? As you said, you need to understand enough to ask the right questions to the local payroll expert that is, doing the things for you on the ground. But it's probably going to be a challenge to be that deep without really being, ingrained in the local fabric and the local country environment.
Exactly, and also we depend on that third party who administers payroll to be the expert. But to be fair to them and fair to us, we need to acknowledge that there may be a limitation, and it could be something very specialized. And a great example is global mobility. How do you treat expenses paid for someone who's on assignment from Ireland to China? How do you account for someone who's relocating permanently from Belgium to Hong Kong. I'm just throwing those out there as examples.
Right.
So we may get a whole list of expenses. So the question is, how do we determine the taxability? Are they taxable benefits that need to be included with their monthly pay? Are they non-taxable, but we still need to report them? Those types of questions, your payroll provider may not know the answers to. It may be beyond the scope of what they can do. So in that case, you may need to engage a specialist, an accounting firm, a tax firm that specializes in global mobility who can help you with that. Another example, equity payment. You give out restricted stock units or stock options. Common in the US, may not be as common in other countries. And again, engaging a specialist so that in turn, you can give direction and guidance to your payroll providers to say, by the way, we're paying this person, we're getting them these restricted stock units. Here's what we've been told how to treat them. See the instructions we're going to give you to include this with the payroll, because we know it's beyond their scope. So we need to bring that specialist and share that knowledge with them so that collectively they can process it accurately.
Yeah, makes sense. Now, John, we talked a fair amount about sort of the hard functional skills, I would call it, of understanding, and sort of getting more comfortable with different international payrolls. What about soft skills? As you're stepping into global payroll responsibility, any learnings that you experienced as you kind of transition into that more global context that made you go, oh wow, I didn't anticipate this to be part of that learning curve that you went through?
Absolutely. I was given good advice at the very beginning by our payroll lead. And what she emphasized was a lot of times we communicate through email, especially for our local offices. Our service provider, we have a client contact either in the UK or Mauritius. We don't have contact with the local office directly, their local office. So It's going to be our local office. And luckily, just the way our company operates, we're still communicating in English back and forth. However, to be sensitive that not everyone, English is not our first language. How we write our emails is important. We have to be, and this is not intended to be dumbing it down or condescending. It's the opposite. Short sentences, simple sentences, put them in bullet points. The idea is write your communication in small or in easily translatable pieces, knowing that the person reading this is going to have to translate this, whether they speak English or they're using, say, Google Translate or some other translation service. Don't give them a huge paragraph just jam-packed with details and maybe even local lingo that is going to be difficult to translate. Make it easier for them, because the flip side is you can get an email back that just doesn't make any sense because they're struggling to translate it back. Funny story. We talked about Israel. I've received emails where I've been copied on where it's in Hebrew. So I'm thinking, okay, Google Translate, do your magic. So I'm just trying to translate it. And maybe 90% of the time it's good. Sometimes the translation's a little off, but if I can generally make sense of the document I received, I can direct it to our provider and say, oh, I think this is the tax document, or I think this is pension. The translation may be off a little bit, but can I at least get the gist of the message? So in whether we send emails back and forth or documents, I try to be cognizant and sensitive that it's going to have to be translated. Try to do this in easily digestible portions so that they do the same thing in return. And on WebExes or on calls, I try to speak slower. I'm usually a fast talker, and give the other person a chance to digest and then respond. Because again, I don't speak Japanese. She does. She speaks English pretty well. Her English is better than my Japanese, but I have to respect that she needs time to translate that. There's an extra step for her, when I talk to my contact. So, and sometimes, especially if I'm talking like the Netherlands, they speak English so well that I forget that, well, hold on, they're translating into Dutch first. Slow down, give them time.
Yeah. And I think in a native speaking English context, we also tend to fall into the habit of using a lot of jargons and, sort of idiomatic expressions that make sense to us and, as native English speakers. But for someone who's not as familiar with those expressions, that can be very difficult to put them into context and understand what's the reference here, right? So I think it's very good advice.
Especially if you talk about American English.
Yeah.
I can't say the number of times holiday and vacation have been used interchangeably and creates a lot of confusion. We hear holiday and we think, oh, public holiday, like a bank holiday or Christmas or Easter. And in return, the person communicating is thinking vacation time.
Vacation time.
Back, 4 years, I still see that come up quite a bit. So I try to ask clarifying questions. Do you mean, we call it vacation, do you mean the same thing? Annual holiday, I'm assuming you mean this. And don't be afraid to ask clarifying questions. And if you make mistakes, that's okay. Admit the mistakes, apologize. Just be humble. Be humble. That will be most helpful in building those relationships.
So for someone listening to this who maybe is, early on in their payroll career, or maybe it's just, at a point where they're thinking about making a transition, wanting to get exposed to a global payroll opportunity, what advice would you give them? How do they get started? How do they find opportunities? How do they prepare themselves? Any good advice on how to get into that space?
I guess what I recommend, obviously it'd be look for those job postings that are available. You see them on LinkedIn, you go to a company website, are they posting a job in global payroll or international payroll? Sometimes they've used the terms interchangeably. Take a chance. Don't be afraid to apply for it. They think, oh, well, they want specific experience in this country or with numerous countries. That may be true, but don't let that requirement deter you from applying. That you can easily leverage your own domestic payroll experience, your knowledge, your formal training, especially if you have a certification in whatever country you're in, whatever local professional organization you're involved with. And if you're not involved with one, I highly recommend you become involved with one. If they offer a certification program, I highly recommend that as well, because that gets you leverage, that gets you credibility, a certification to complement your experience, even if it's at a domestic or local payroll level. There are aspects of your own experience that can easily transfer to global payroll. You can look at the different parts of the payroll operation, the timekeeping, the different forms of pay, the taxes, the leave, the output, whether it's a tax filing, a pay slip. That's a very high level, but your experience with local payroll can translate to global. Don't be afraid to highlight that when you apply for that job. And then if you do gain the interview, highlight that again, and definitely emphasize the soft skills. How good are your communication skills with speaking, with writing? And how open are you to learning and being comfortable being uncomfortable, being comfortable with being at the very bottom of the learning curve. It's not everyone is fully trained on this stuff. We may know a couple of countries at most, but we're willing to learn more. We're willing to take on more. And as far as getting into the global payroll space, applying for those jobs if you see them posted, and then highlighting how your own experience can be applicable to that particular job. And it can be. It doesn't take a whole lot of creativity to say, well, I have experience in these areas. If I could do it for this, I know I could do it for those countries as well too. So, and I think that's a fair game. You should be successful in that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you mentioned when you talked about your own evolution, your own career progression, that you first kind of got exposed to the international payroll context through the APA and going to APA events, and they had this sort of track, the GPMI, the Global Payroll Management Institute, that was promoting and exposing more the international dimensions of payroll. And I wonder what kind of besides being exposed to it, and getting you interested, did your engagement, involvement with the APA and the GPMI, did that then also help you in terms of making that professional transition? Were there resources that you were able to tap into out of that association network that facilitate your transition into global payroll?
I believe so. I mean, we'll take GPMI as an example, that they offered sessions or classes covering the kind of the foundations of payroll in a specific country: Belgium, France, Germany, Japan, Hong Kong. That even taking those classes, taking those courses, whether it's web-based or they offer a live event, attending those. If you attend the payroll congress, and they offer those sessions at that conference, to attend those as well, it's a good introductory material, a good introduction to global payroll. So that's the formal training. And then the resources, of course, GPMI, they'll have their own, they'll showcase a particular country and talk about the payroll in that country, and as well as having articles and other resources about different delivery models and things to look for as far as different vendors, different approaches to administering payroll, whether you're using kind of a desegregated approach or an aggregator model, or you're doing everything in-house, or somewhere in between on that spectrum. So learning about the industry as well too. So that's the second piece: individual country payroll knowledge, learning about the industry itself. And third, networking. I made a lot of friends. I was introduced to a lot of friends outside of the United States, and was able to maintain those contacts, especially on LinkedIn. I'll use LinkedIn as an example. You've got individuals you can reach out to with questions like, "Hey, I'm interested in payroll in the UK. What are some aspects or characteristics I should be looking for? What are some unique challenges I should be made aware of?" Definitely build that network. Definitely take advantage of that. So between those three, I've definitely saw GPMI and the American Payroll Association both together have helped me.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, I like that network point you make. In my experience, it's one of these amazing attributes of payroll professionals, that they are so generous in terms of educating others, educating each other, right? I always say it's kind of a small brother and sisterhood of passionate people, and everyone has built up their own sort of knowledge base in their specific area, in their industry, in their specific geographic dimension that they cover. And there's so much that we all can learn from each other, and I think tapping into that communal knowledge base is a great way of learning and seeing how other people got on. So I would echo that. Definitely reach out to people that work maybe in geographies that you'd love to get exposed to, and you want to learn more about and hear about how they kind of build up their own expertise in those areas. Well, fantastic. Listen, that kind of covers the angles we wanted to talk about today. Before we go, what we'd like to do is, as we finish up, we'd like to do what we call the lightning round, where it's a chance to get to know our guests a little bit more. And the way it works is I ask some a rapid fire round of questions, and then we get your answers, whatever comes to mind. There's no right or wrong. So you ready for it, John?
Let's do it.
Here we go. So when you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I wanted to make movies like George Lucas. I want to make movies like Star Wars.
I like that. Are you still a movie fan then? Do you still enjoy going to the movies or watching movies?
Well, I do. I haven't been to a movie theater in a bit, but I do, watch them on TV and Netflix or Disney Plus. I'm a science fiction fan, so trying to catch up on the latest Star Wars or Doctor Who. That's just me.
Good, good stuff. What gives you most satisfaction in your job?
Yeah, gosh, that's a hard one to nail down. If I could narrow it down to just two, the relationships I've built with my coworkers, not just locally but internationally. My two HR contacts in Japan, they're fabulous. We had a great relationship for years. My friends in Belgium, my friends in Hong Kong, my friends in Israel, and I'm making new friends in Turkey. It's to me, it feels like I know we're a world away. We're communicating through email and WebExes, but it still feels like extended family. You know, that we're friends. I feel like we've known each other for so long. The other aspect, just like I said, every job, every career, there's always some little thing that drew us into this, some little thing that's something we nerd out on. We do just kind of geek out. And a good job is going to have some aha moments. And I've had a lot of aha moments working in global payroll where I figure out some technical weird thing within that country. And I think, aha, I got this. I think I nailed this. It took me years to learn how vacation and double vacation pay work in Belgium. But when I finally think I got a handle on it, huge aha moment. Like, oh, I should just shut down my computer and call it a day because I'm going to leave on a good note. But again, it's those aha moments that give you that job satisfaction. You're picking apart something. How does it work? And you figure out how this thing works, and you get a kind of a little bit of a rush.
Well, I think that was just a clue for anyone who wants to find out about how vacation in Belgium works to call John. Sounds like you cracked the code.
I did.
Talking about cracking the code, so imagine I'm a 5-year-old. How would you explain to me what payroll is?
Payroll is, well, paying people to, in return, they're going to do work. They agree to work for our company. They agree to help us build a product, provide a service in return for pay. We pay them. That's their job. And our job as payroll professionals is to help the company fulfill their promise. We promise to pay people what a particular amount, whether an annual salary, or hourly wage. We promise to pay them on time. We promise to handle all the requirements as far as taxes or garnishments or any of those things that go into a paycheck that are benefits. Our promise is we're compensating people, and we're going to make good on our promise. And in return, they're going to give back to us. They're going to work. They're going to help us build planes. They're going to provide a service. They're going to contribute to the company. So as the company grows, they grow. So short answer is we pay people so that they will work for us.
I like the short answer. You lost me there for a second on garnishments.
Garnishment. It's funny. It might be a United States term. It's an involuntary deduction. Garnishment would be, for example, child support.
No, you didn't lose. You didn't lose me. I know what it is, but the 5-year-old self, my 5-year-old self, was scratching its head for
scratching
a second.
Its head.
What's a garnishment, Daddy? But the rest make perfect sense. People want to get paid for helping you build the business. That makes
helping us build a business. Exactly.
Yeah. Final question, a little bit of fun. If you had a magic wand and you could change anything you wanted to change in payroll, what would you change?
Oh gosh. Does it have to be our own company or just in general?
It could be in general. It could be something very specific, like I don't know. I want to change the vacation rules in Belgium, or
I could change anything. Gosh. Some way to trying to think how I could articulate this. If I could change anything, I would love for payroll to be more consistent across the different countries around the world. They don't have to be exactly the same, but at least consistent, where it's easy to pick up going from one country to the next, that it's easy to understand, that the tax laws are roughly similar, the social insurance laws are roughly similar. The way we process payroll is roughly similar enough that it's easier to get up to speed quicker. It's easier to integrate. It's easier to administer payroll no matter where you are in the world. So some way that to make it a bit more, I hate to say standardized because now I'm trying to make everybody eat the same cheeseburger. That's boring. But I'm thinking a little bit more, less chaotic, a little more. There's more similarities and differences, so that it's a little bit easier to minister and work on. Because
Yeah.
the beauty of that is when I'm less worried about, am I doing this right, or I'm not sure I understand this, I'm in a place where I feel comfortable with what I'm working on. I can enjoy those little nuances that come with each country. It's almost like going to a country and eating the local cuisine or learning a local language. Payroll is a window to that particular country. How companies pay their people, how governments set up their labor laws or tax laws, what they consider important, says a lot about that country, that culture, and their people. So it sounds kind of strange, like we're talking about this through payroll, but think about how payroll is personal to people. I mean, their livelihood is depending on us. How we administer that livelihood depends on where they live, what rules they're subject to. But in the end, this is such a personal aspect of their lives, much like going to a restaurant and eating a local dish. That's personal. We're all eating the same food, you know. So as you learn about that dish, as you learn about that payroll, you're learning about the people, you're learning about that particular country, and that's the thing to focus on. You know, what cultural things, what little nuances are you picking up by learning that? You know, I use the analogy. It's easy to get upset when you're stuck in traffic because the commute's taking 2 hours. But if you don't stop to pay attention that, hey, there's a beautiful sunset just past those trees, that you're not paying attention to the good things that are happening around you, when you're so focused on those bad things. I think of payroll in the same sense. Don't get frustrated by all the gory details and the frustrations that come with it. There are some good there. I could not have built my relationships up with those individuals in the other countries, my coworkers, the third party provider, you know, without taking the time to just appreciate everybody. You know, that maybe my email to somebody isn't just necessarily I have a problem, I need you to help me fix it. Maybe it's just an impromptu, hey, how's it going? What's happening? You know, I understand you guys are having a holiday this week. Tell me more about that.
Yeah.
Those little things make a big difference. And it's like, if you're doing global payroll, take advantage of the fact that you're talking to and working with people in other countries. Don't pass up that opportunity. You know, we don't get that opportunity in domestic payroll. Take advantage of that, enjoy that, you know, and I try to, you know, as much
Yeah.
as I can.
Agreed. Yeah, and even though as you said, would make your life maybe a little easier if things were a bit more harmonized. The fact that things are different, and do challenge us to think out of our own box that we've kind of gotten used to. I think in some ways makes it also that much more fun and exposes you to how different people approach different things. And as you said, I think you learn a lot about people's cultures, even by looking at how they approach different topics in payroll. Living here in Europe, living in Spain at the moment, and having lived in different countries in Europe, I can certainly say that each country, even though we're all supposedly part of the EU, each country has very own ways of handling payroll, and you do sort of get an appreciation for where the history and the culture of that specific country, where that's come from. So it's kind of fun.
Exactly. It's almost like it's not just that those are the laws on the books. It gets to why do they have those laws? The why.
Yeah.
How do we get to this point? And
Yeah.
there are some cultural reasons. There are some priorities. There are some assumptions. There are some attitudes that feed into that. Whether it's a government or a company,
Yeah.
they consider this to be important. That's why we do this, or it's important because it's something culturally accepted or it's expected. That's important. Understanding that, you do less memorizing and more learning about that particular country's payroll.
I love it. I think we ended on payroll as culture, and sort of. And I liked your food reference too, and that's kind of it's it's almost dinner time here in Europe, so I'm starting to get hungry just thinking about your reference to sampling different foods. So good place to end. John, thanks so much for coming on. Before we wrap up, any last plugs, shout outs that you want to leave people with?
I just recommend, don't be afraid to try something new. Don't be afraid to stick your toe or stick your foot into global payroll. And in the meantime, if you are not involved with a professional organization like the APA or CIPP or any of the others, definitely get involved. Whether it's taking the courses or networking with other professionals, it will help you develop your career, it'll help you develop yourself professionally. And if there's an opportunity to pursue a certification, do that. Those certifications are like currency in the sense that you are seen as the expert. And as you introduce yourself into the global payroll world, if you have that certification for your own home payroll, that's currency. Others will want to network with you and share with you because they want to learn about you. They want to learn about what you know. And in return, they'll share what they know. So take advantage of that. Build up that currency so that you can go out there and explore this world and just enjoy it and just take advantage of it. It's crazy, but it could be fun too.
Absolutely. And I would add to that, if you want to learn about Belgian payroll, you now know John has all the answers.
I'll put you on the spot.
No pressure. Listen, thank you so much, John, for coming on. This was great. Thanks for sharing your experience, your insights with folks out there. And thank you everyone for watching and being with us today. If you like what you heard, if you like our content, then please subscribe, hit the like button, and make sure you tune in again for our next episode. So thank you so much, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much, Mark, for having me on here. This has been fabulous. Had a blast.